Howdy folks, welcome back to the second episode of Mingles with Jingles. This is the series, of course, where you guys ask and I do, my best to answer. We're going to kick straight off with the first question, which comes from Ethan Whitney. This was posted on the previous Mingles with Jingles video, and he wants to know, Jingles, do you think World of Warships is going to be any good, and are you going to play it when it comes out? Right, well, am I going to play it? Hell yes, it's a free-to-play game. Why on earth wouldn't I play it? I'll certainly give it a go. Do I think it's going to be any good? Well, it's far too early to be jumping to conclusions about the quality of something that, as far as I know, has barely made it into alpha testing. I have high hopes for it. I haven't actually played a naval combat simulator. I never played Navy Field 2, but I haven't played one since Harpoon 360, I think, back on the Commodore Amiga, and it wasn't really the same style of game. It was more a strategy game. There were a couple of other naval simulators that I played a long time ago, and I can't even remember the names of the things, but they weren't that good. My one fear for World of Warships was the limitations of the big world game engine, and that's one of the, well, I'm not going to say problems, because I think it works reasonably well with World of Tanks, but the big world game engine is limited in the size of the maps that it can draw. And when you look at naval engagements in the Second World War, and you have battleships shooting at each other from anything from 6 to 15 miles away, and then you look at the size of the maps in World of Tanks, no bigger than a kilometre or a kilometre and a half on a side, I had serious worries about what the hell World of Warships was going to be like. Well, I don't think they're using the big world game engine for World of Warships. I do know that when asked what size the maps were going to be, probably by other people who were kind of worried about it the same way I was, that the answer, and this is on the World of Warships forum, was the maps were going to be up to 50 kilometres by 50 kilometres. So that's absolutely huge. That's massive. That's bigger than any existing map in War Thunder. And War Thunder's got some big maps. So that's really, really reassuring. Speaking of World of Warships, there are a lot of people who are not very happy hedgehogs because the Royal Navy is not incorporated into World of Warships on release. And there's all sorts of reasons cited for why this is a terrible idea. The only navy, aside from the Germans, that was in the war from the start to the finish, the navy that fought the longest campaign of any branch or arm of service or nationality in the entire war, the Arctic convoys. The navy that's been around in one form or another for over 1,000 years. The navy that invented the modern battleship. And you can, all sorts of things that you can throw out about the Royal Navy. Like it or not, it was the biggest, most powerful navy in the world up until the beginning of the Second World War. But the thing about World of Warships, and the thing about the Second World War, is that the majority of the naval battles, the kind of things that are being modelled and simulated in a game like World of Warships, didn't happen in the Atlantic. It was the Pacific War between the Imperial Japanese Navy and the US Navy. That's where most of the naval battles occurred in the Second World War. Battle of Midway, Battle of the Coral Sea, Battle of the Leyte Gulf, even though I'm probably not pronouncing it right. But, the naval war in World War II was in the Pacific. I'm not knocking the contribution by the Merchant Marine and the Royal Navy and the Arctic convoys. It was important. But the big fights between the big fleets, that happened in the Pacific. The Arctic convoys were air attacks, submarines, against escorting destroyers and frigates. There are going to be no submarines in World of Warships. So I completely 100% understand the reasons for World of Warships going live with just the Imperial Japanese Navy and the US Navy. I don't like it, but they have to start somewhere, and it makes sense to choose those two forces. So, national bias aside, I can 100% understand why they're doing things the way they are. And they are going to introduce more navies. After release, they plan to introduce Britain, Germany, the USSR, France, and Italy. So they are going to be in there. The same way the Royal Air Force is going to be in World of Warplanes. I have a significantly bigger problem with the Royal Air Force not being in World of Warplanes because, aside from the Luftwaffe, the only air force that was actually in the Second World War from start to finish, along with the Luftwaffe, the air force that fought and won the single biggest air battle in history. There's all sorts of reasons why not having the RAF in is just insulting. But it is what it is. World of Warplanes, and again, I did my hands-on of World of Warplanes, and I didn't like it. I have to admit, the video's right up there. I'm not admitting anything. You all know I didn't like it. But let's not get too carried away here. World of Warplanes is still in closed beta. Right, they've just lifted the non-disclosure agreement. You're looking here at War Thunder, and it does look spectacular, and it does play very, very, very well. But it's in open beta. World of Warplanes still is not at the point where they are ready to unveil it to the public in the same way that War Thunder clearly is at that point. So you've got to cut World of Warplanes some slack. I believe at the moment it's a bit of a stinker, but they're not ready. It's the fact that it is a bit of a stinker shouldn't really come as a surprise, considering the stage of development that it's at. And look at the competition that they're up against. I mean, look at this. I really, really hope World of Warplanes and World of Warships are good games, because I want War Thunder to have some healthy competition, to make the War Thunder developers keep trying. And I said this in my World of Warplanes preview, for want of a better word. Developers that don't have competition stop trying, right? And they get lazy. And the people that pay for it are you and me, the players. Developers that have competition, that are constantly snapping at their heels, go that extra mile to make their game good, to make their game competitive. And that can only be good for the likes of you and me, the people playing the games. So yeah, I believe World of Warships is going to be good. I certainly hope it's going to be good. I hope World of Warplanes gets significantly better than it already is, because it can only be good for us, the gamers. So there you go. It's a bit of a long way of answering your question, but yeah. Ethan, thanks for the question. It was a good one. There's my answer. The next question comes from Rosengard1, and he wants to know, and it's sort of related to the first question, am I looking forward to the Navy and Army parts of War Thunder being playable? Oh yeah. Oh, hell yeah. And this is, aside from the fact that War Thunder has this tried, tested, proven, battle-ready game engine from Il-2 Sturmovik and Birds of Prey and, whatever you want to... all the other games that this game engine has been used on and refined and tweaked. The other massive advantage that War Thunder has over the competition is that all three of their games are going to use the same game engine. So they can have all three of their games playing at the same time, in the same battlefield. Wargaming can't do that, because they use different game engines. It is not possible for them to have player-controlled warships in World of Warships with player-controlled aircraft from World of Warplanes and player-controlled tanks from World of Tanks in the same battlefield. They just cannot do it. They use different game engines. War Thunder's biggest advantage is the fact that all three of their games are basically going to be using exactly the same game engine, and that's what allows them to have all three arms of service fighting each other on the same maps. So that's a massive advantage, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. But this is where Wargaming have got the advantage over Gaijin, and that's with regards to their tank game. Because the shoe is completely on the other foot when it comes to War Thunder's armoured warfare game, because they've got no experience of developing this sort of thing. They've got the game engine, that's great, but you have to put a game in there as well. And that's something Wargaming have done very, very, very well with World of Tanks. World of Tanks is a fantastic game, regardless of how you feel about the quality of the teams that you end up on. And I could go on about that for hours, but that's not Wargaming's fault. That's the people playing the game. You're going to have exactly the same problem in War Thunder, in the armoured combat section, and Wargaming have got a huge development lead. Well, their game's finished. It's been out for years. War Thunder have got a bit of a mountain to climb when it comes to putting in the armoured tank section of the game. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they do, and I wish them luck. I wish them luck for the same reason that I wish the World of Warplanes development team luck, because having two games as good as each other, both covering the same subject, is good for you and me. I do have to admit to feeling slightly concerned about War Thunder's chances of pulling off, decent competition to World of Tanks. Because, I mean, just look at this. Look at how detailed that battlefield is. Look at the complexity in the environment. And they can do that because of the small size of the maps in World of Tanks. Let's not forget, the maps are going to be bloody huge in War Thunder's tank section of the game. And when you get down to low level in War Thunder, when you're flying your aircraft, the ground looks alright, but it doesn't look as good as this. And a tank game is going to live and die based on how good the maps are. So, yeah, I think War Thunder have got a bit of a mountain to climb for themselves. Aside from the fact that that this is their competition, and their competition is damn good. I'm not entirely certain that War Thunder's game engine is going to give you the same game experience as this. And I'm not completely sure that they're even going to try to do that. It may well be that they recognise they can't beat World of Tanks playing it at its own game. Small maps, gorgeously detailed, the way World of Tanks does it. It may very well be that they're not even going to try to go one better, and what they're going to do is big maps, massive teams. But this is just speculation. I don't know. It would make sense to me if that was the way they were going to approach it, because they're not playing to wargaming strengths that way. But it's pure speculation. Nobody has a clue. Gaijin have a clue. None of us have a clue how Gaijin are going to go about implementing their ground warfare game. But fingers crossed, and I certainly hope it's good, for the same reasons that I wish World of Warplanes all the best, because I want them to be valuable competition for each other, because the only people that can profit by that are you and me, the gamers. The next question comes from Mr. One Nut, and he says, do you think your players improved platooning with high efficiency players like Sircon and Quickie Baby, and what things do you take away from games with them? Okay, first of all, that's a really, really good question. Thank you for asking. This is actually something I wanted to talk about for a while and didn't really have the right time or place to do it. And these Mingles with Jingles videos are the ideal place to do it. And thank you for reminding me to approach this subject. What makes a good player in World of Tanks? When you start playing World of Tanks, when you're a newbie, you have absolutely no idea what's going on. All you know is you're in a tiny little tank, you've got a gun and a turret, and on the other team are a whole bunch of other tiny little tanks. So you just drive forward until you see something, then you stop and you start shooting at them, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, and you don't really know what's going on, but you're having fun, so you don't really care. Now, for some people, that's good enough, and unfortunately, when they've lost enough games, they end up driving tier 10 tanks and they still play like that. Most of us, however, want to get better. So, the second level in your World of Tanks education, if you like, is usually around about tier 3 and 4, when you rapidly come to the conclusion that just doing what you did at tier 1 and 2, driving straight towards the enemy tanks and blazing away at them until either you're dead or he is, isn't working anymore, because you start coming across tanks that you just can't penetrate by doing that. Now, when you get to this stage, once again, you're split into one of two groups of players. Either you just go to the forums and whine about it, or you realise that, well, other people have run into this sort of problem and they seem to be able to get past it, and you try to figure out why. And so you start processing more information. The game is giving you vast amounts of information, but you don't recognise it at first. The first element of information that you're processing when you're playing the game is there an enemy tank in front of me? Can I see an enemy tank? And if you can see an enemy tank, you start shooting at him, and that is the sum total of the information that your mind is processing when you're playing the game. You get to tier 3 or 4, that's not good enough anymore. You start processing more information. You start processing information like, what's the thickness of the armour of that tank in front of me? How much penetration does my gun have? what kind of tank am I in? Am I in a heavy tank? Am I in a medium tank? Am I in a tank destroyer? If I have absolutely no sense of self-respect, perhaps I'm in artillery. Sorry, had to get that in. And at this stage of the game, you may be at tier 6, maybe at tier 7. If you're any good, you'll start thinking about more than just what's in front of me, can I penetrate it? You'll start thinking about where should I be going on this map based on the kind of tank you're driving. And the overwhelming majority of players in World of Tanks are at exactly that level. Right? They're not stupid. They've tried tactics. They've what's the right way of putting this? They've had experiences in the past driving Tank A on map B in position C that's worked well for them, and so they try to repeat that experience. For example, on the monastery map on Abbey, that road that runs north-south on the eastern side of the map is usually where the heavy tanks go. Certainly the top tier heavy tanks, that's normally where they go, and generally speaking, if some heavy tanks don't go down that way, you're going to lose. Most people are at the sort of level where that's as much as they recognise in the game, and that's absolutely fine. It's good enough to win half of your matches, on average, if you play enough games. But players at that stage of development or awareness are still only processing a small fraction of the amount of information that the game is making available to them, and they will get themselves into trouble based on their experience of what you should be doing on that map. And I'll give you an example. Sticking with the monastery map, for example, I mentioned that the road that runs north-south on the eastern side of the map is usually where the heavy tanks and the big heavy tank destroyers go. And the kind of player who knows that, say he's driving, I don't know, maybe you're in a tier 8 game and he's in an IS-3. He's in the biggest heavy tank on his team, and he knows that usually on that map, heavy tanks go down that road. So he thinks, I'm a good player, I will do the responsible thing, and I will drive my heavy tank down that road. And everybody else on his team abandons him and leaves him to it. And they all head wherever. Doesn't matter, but they don't go down that road with him. The majority of players in the game are at the stage where they will still carry on trying to do the right thing in their IS-3 tank as the top tier tank in a tier 8 game, and still try to attack down that road, because that's what you should be doing if you're in an IS-3 in a tier 8 game on that map. They're wrong. Normally that's the right thing to do, but based on what else is going on the map, based on what your team is doing or what your team is not doing, based on what the enemy team is doing the right thing in that sort of circumstance is just as stupid as the rest of the team abandoning you and all lemming training off up the other side of the map. Most players playing World of Tanks are at that level. Their tactics, how they react to what map they find themselves on, is based purely not on the situation that is actually unfolding around them, but on previous experiences on that map in that kind of tank. And that's fantastic, as long as the situation unfolds in a similar way to how they've previously experienced it. But the second something unexpected happens, they don't know how to deal with it, because they're playing based on experience, rather than actually opening their eyes and looking around. You know, as I so often say in my World of Tanks videos, look at your map. This is not the same game you've played on this map 50 times in the past. Each game is different. And I am at the stage where I recognise that. And instead, I mean, you can. There's a lot you can tell from how a game's going to develop in the first 30 seconds before you even start the tank up, just based on what tank you're in, what map you're on, what else you've got on your team, what the enemy team have available to them, and you can predict to a large extent what sort of tanks you're going to run into if you go this way in the tank that you're driving. And that's great, and that's where most people are at, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's when what you predicted doesn't happen that a lot of people fall apart and don't know how to react. And in fact, the usual reaction is to just start raging at your team for being a bunch of noobs and putting you in that situation in the first place. And most people will plough on, still trying to do the right thing, and it just gets them killed, because when your team act against all rationality and do their level best to lose the match, carrying on doing the right thing, going down that road because you're in the top tier heavy, is suicide. It's the wrong thing to do now. It's the right thing to do if you have some backup and support. And it's worked previously in the past because you had some backup and support. But attacking alone down that road when the entire team have lemming trained off the west side of the map, for example, is now the worst possible thing you could do. But most people don't recognise that. They still keep trying to do it because it's the right thing to do. But it isn't the right thing to do anymore. You're not processing the information the game is giving you. The game has shown you that your entire team has left you alone there. Stop trying to play the game as if you have support. You don't. React accordingly. And it's the ability to process that kind of information without losing your rag and raging at the team. I mean, by all means rage at the team, but do it later. At the moment, you need to dig in and defend that corner, not attack down it. As an example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. Now, that's kind of the level I'm at. And I have been at that level for a long time. Quickie Baby and Circumflexes, on the other hand, are a level even higher than that. Most people watching these guys play, and other players like them, just don't even understand exactly what it is they're watching. They just see guys who crush everything, who have an almost supernatural ability to have their tank in the right place at the right time. To most people watching, Quickie Baby in particular, but Circumflexes is pretty damn good too. Most people watching them just think they're watching the two luckiest bastards they've ever seen play a game of World of Tanks. That is so not the case. Luck has absolutely nothing to do with the way these guys kick ass. I'm at the level where I can appreciate what they're doing, the sheer amount of data that their brains are processing for them to be able to play the way they do. I can recognise that I should be able to do that, and yet I just can't. I will forget to look at the map for 30 seconds and it will get me killed. I will forget. I will be sitting there hiding around a corner because I'm concerned that artillery might be ranging on me, and I haven't looked at the team list for 15 seconds and haven't realised that all the enemy artillery is dead. Quickie Baby and Circumflexes never miss that information. They're constantly processing all of the information that the game is telling them. They always know exactly how many tanks are left in the enemy team. They always know exactly which tanks are left in the enemy team. And even while they're fighting one tank, half of their mind is thinking about where the rest of the enemy tanks are. They can see where 2 enemy tanks are. They're there on the map. But there are still 3 enemy tanks unaccounted for. And while they're fighting one tank, they're calculating where those tanks are likely to be based on where their friendly tanks are. And it's like watching a computer process information. It's and I know I'm never going to be that good. I have improved from playing with Quickie Baby and Circumflexes, but I know that I've reached my limit. I'm probably not going to get much better than I currently am, and I am never going to be as good as these two. But it's like, I'm a good enough mountain climber to see the peak of the mountain, but I know I can't go any higher. And sitting right up there at the top, you've got players like Quickie Baby and Circumflexes, and I understand how they got there, but I know I'm not good enough to get up there with them. Next question comes from Finn Andre, and he wants to know, what's my most interesting day in the Navy? Damn, that's a good question. I had to think long and hard about this one. And I think I'm going to go with, in 2002, I was on board HMS Newcastle. It was the 20th anniversary of the Falklands War, and HMS Newcastle was performing the job of South Atlantic guard ship at the time. And there were various memorial services held in the Falklands around Port Stanley and at Goose Green and so on and so on. And when we weren't doing things like restoring and looking after the Type 21 frigate memorial at the top of Campito Hill overlooking San Carlos Water, That was quite emotional, actually. We had a sonar operator who was on board HMS Ardent when it got hit in 1982. And he joined us to go to the top of the Type 21 Memorial, and we did a short service up there, and it got a bit emotional. Poor old Henry. He was a good lad. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. When we weren't doing all the official business down there, we were taking advantage of the battlefield tours that the Resident Infantry Company were putting on. Now, at the time, the Resident Infantry Company were from the 3rd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, from 3 Para. And we were taken around Goose Green. There was a whole bunch of about 30 of us sailors, with an army major called Major Tom Abel of 3 Para. Now, here's the thing. Major Tom Abel of 3 Para in 2002, 20 years prior to that, had been Corporal Tom Abel of 2 Para. And he'd actually fought at Goose Green. So normally, when one of these infantry officers is taking you around the battlefield, they're just literally reading from a sheet of paper. They're taking you around, showing you the spots where this happened and that happened. And Major Abel didn't need to read from no sheet of paper. Major Abel was there. And the battle at Goose Green was it was 1 battalion of paratroopers. We're talking about 800 men fighting against 5,000 Argentinians. Now, that sounds worse than it was. I mean, it was pretty bad. But the majority of those Argentinian soldiers out and around Goose Green were cooks, clerks. They were service troops, and even the infantry that were there were conscripts. The Argentinian government had pulled out most of its crack troops because they basically knew they were going to lose, and they didn't want to lose their best troops. So all that they had left to defend the Malvinas were the conscripts, the guys who were just serving out their term of service. But nevertheless, there were 5,000 of them, and they were brave soldiers. And so Major Tom Abel is telling us what happened because he was there. This is what happened to him, and it was one of the most sobering experiences. Just listen to him talk about the slaughter. There's no other word for it. Of trying to attack these. They're basically the intelligence that they had on what Argentinian positions were on the battlefield. The attack plan was based on the available intelligence from the SBS and SAS patrols that had gone out and mapped out the enemy positions, but it wasn't complete intelligence. There were entire companies of Argentinian troops dug in trench positions that nobody realised were there. And 2 Para ran right into a bunch of them. And there was an Argentinian sniper, a very, very good Argentinian sniper, a couple of 100 yards back from the trench line, who kept headshotting all the officers and sergeants. And he was very, very good at what he did. And 2 Para soon found themselves running out of leadership. And it was just... The story, as he told it, was... You could have heard of... I mean, we're sitting there on... I'll just give you an example. Most of the troops, as they came across the open ground from Goose Green, they started taking fire as they were coming across this open ground from a trench line that they just had no idea was there. So they pegged it forwards and got into this a ravine, a sort of depression in the ground. And anybody who had any 7.62 Link ammo just dumped it on the machine gun detachment. And they set up the machine guns on the ridge to give them cover and fire when they charged up into the trenches. And these machine gunners, they were firing until the barrels were white hot. And I shit you not, 20 years later, standing where those machine guns were set up, these GPMG 7.62mm medium machine guns, you could just kick the ground, and 20 years later, you would kick up shell casings, ammunition link. You were basically standing not on Earth, but on a thin layer of Earth over a massive layer of ammo. That's how many, it's just, it was wow. And listening to Major Abel talk about what they went through that day was, by the end of the story, which must have taken 20 minutes for him to tell us what happened over the course of that day, you could have heard a pin drop. There's just 20 or 30 sailors just stand there open-mouthed in horror at what those paratroopers went through, and what the Argentinian conscripts in the trenches went through, because, at the end of the day, the paratroopers won. And when he'd finished, I said, "Sir, I think I speak for every single sailor here when I say I have no fucking idea how you soldiers do the job you do." And Major Abel turned around and he smiled. And he said, "It's a funny old thing, but when we were pulling our wounded back and trying to dig ourselves into shell scrapes, as bullets are whizzing over our heads, it's pitch black, and the only illumination was coming from the bombs going off, hitting the ships that were sitting ducks in San Carlos water 8 miles away. And we were all sitting there thinking, you know what, I don't know how the fuck those sailors can do that job that they do." So it's all a matter of perspective. Well, that was a massive bummer. And that's about all we have time for, I'm afraid. Oh, you know what, I've only answered about 3 questions, and this video is over half an hour long, and I've ended it on a real bummer, so sorry about that. Keep the questions coming in, though. Stick them in the comments to this video, so I can they're all in one place, so I can, when I come to do the next video, all I have to do is look at the comments of this one, and what I try to do is I try to pick the questions that I can give the most interesting answer to, and that's why I've only answered 3 questions, and it's taken me half an hour this time around. I do read them all. I have a lot of fun reading them all, but I obviously can't possibly answer them all. I'll do the best I can, however. A couple of things to mention just before we come to a close. I now have a Twitter account. For those of you who care, the details of the Twitter account in the video description. And it's just another way of passing information out quickly that is just more efficient than putting a YouTube video up. Things like changes in the live stream schedule, whenever I put a new video up, all that sort of thing. So if you have Twitter and you care, by all means follow me on Twitter and get regular updates. If you don't care, don't follow me on Twitter, It's entirely up to you. And that's pretty much it for this week. So if you have questions, stick them in the comments of this video. I do read them all, even if I can't possibly answer them all. And I'll endeavour to select a couple of questions that I can give the most interesting answers to for same time, same place, next week. I hope you've been entertained, and I hope you'll join me again next week when we do it all again. As always, folks, take care on that battlefield. Watch your 6, and I'll catch you next time.